The SS Lumina hung in the void, a sharp silhouette against the swirling nebula that painted the stars with vibrant streaks of blue and gold. Inside, the hum of the ship's systems formed a steady backdrop to the activity of its crew. Captain Darius Kale stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, as he gazed at the glowing map projected before him. A red marker pulsed ominously, indicating their destination, Nova Eterna, a lost colony over 2 centuries forgotten, lying at the edge of explored space. Kale's face, etched with years of leadership, betrayed none of the turmoil simmering beneath his composed demeanor. The mission was an honor, but it was also a weight. For decades, Nova Eterna had been whispered about in the halls of humanity's leadership, a name tinged with mystery and failure. Now, with the advancements in long-range travel and a renewed interest in the remnants of human expansion, Kale and his crew were charged with uncovering the truth about the colony. "We're approaching the jump point," announced Eric Vale, the Lumina's chief engineer, from his console. His voice, always gruff and tinged with impatience, carried an edge of excitement this time. "All systems are stable. Quantum drive is holding steady." Kale turned to his crew, his voice calm but commanding. "Prepare for the jump. Full diagnostic sweeps before we transition. Let's make sure everything holds." Around him, the bridge hummed with activity. Dr. Lyra Ventaris, the ship's xenobiologist, adjusted her interface panel, her bright eyes flicking over the data scrolling past. Her enthusiasm for the mission was palpable. She had spoken at length during their departure about her theories on alien ecosystems and the possible influence of the Athari, an enigmatic alien species rumored to have interacted with Nova Eterna's colonists. Near her, Dr. Serentalier sat quietly, fingers tapping thoughtfully on the edge of her tablet. As the ship's historian, her mind was preoccupied with fragments of data recovered from archives, cryptic transmissions, vague accounts of resource struggles, and whispers of alliances forged in desperation. Her goal was to reconstruct the colony's fate, a task she approached with a scholar's precision and a storyteller's heart. "Jump point stable," Eric called, pulling Kale's attention back. The ship's lights dimmed slightly, signaling the final countdown. "Engage," Kale ordered, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the bridge. The ship shuddered slightly as the quantum drive engaged, bending the fabric of space-time. In an instant, the stars stretched into streaks of light, then vanished, leaving the crew suspended in the surreal silence of the jump. For several tense seconds, the ship seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the faint hum of its engines. When the transition ended, the stars reappeared, brighter and sharper than before. The Lumina emerged near a massive gas giant, whose pale rings glowed faintly against the black void. Beyond it lay their destination, Nova Eterna, a planet bathed in an eerie, silvery light from its twin moons. Kale exhaled softly, his chest tightening at the sight. It was both beautiful and haunting, the planet's surface shrouded in thick, shifting clouds that hinted at mystery and danger. "Orbital scan complete," Lyra said, her voice breaking the silence. "Atmosphere is breathable, but readings are unusual. There's a significant biological presence, but it doesn't match standard Earth-based metrics." "Define unusual," Kale said, stepping closer to her station. She hesitated, frowning at her screen. "There's activity that suggests a thriving ecosystem, but it's not just flora and fauna. The biosignatures are layered, like they're interwoven with something synthetic. It's hard to explain." Kale nodded, his jaw tightening. "We'll learn more on the ground. Vale, prep the shuttle. I want a full team ready to descend within the hour." Eric muttered something under his breath, but Kale caught the sharp glint of determination in his eyes. He knew Eric wasn't one to shy away from challenges, even if he grumbled about them. As the team gathered in the shuttle bay, the air buzzed with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Lyra double-checked her equipment, her fingers brushing over the surface of a compact scanner designed to analyze alien life forms. Saren stood nearby, a faraway look in her eyes as she imagined the stories hidden in the ruins below. Eric supervised the final checks on the shuttle, his movements efficient and practiced, though his terse words betrayed his nerves. Kale entered, his presence grounding the group. "We don't know what we'll find down there," he said, his voice steady. "Stay sharp, stay together, and report anything unusual. We're not just here to explore, we're here to understand." The shuttle's descent was smooth, the vast expanse of Nova Eterna's landscape unfolding beneath them. Jagged mountains rose like sentinels, their peaks glinting in the moonlight. Valleys stretched between them, carpeted in dense, bioluminescent vegetation that pulsed faintly in shifting patterns. Strange structures dotted the landscape, some clearly human-made, their weathered walls bearing the marks of time, while others were alien in design, their curves and glowing surfaces a stark contrast to humanity's angular architecture. The team landed near what appeared to be the remains of a settlement. The buildings were clustered together, their skeletal frames a testament to the colony's once thriving community. Vines with glowing tendrils crept over the structures, merging with the remnants of human technology in ways that defied explanation. Lyra stepped out first, her breath catching as she took in the sight. "It's alive," she whispered, crouching to examine a patch of bioluminescent moss that seemed to react to her presence. The tendrils glowed brighter, curling toward her gloved hand. "Focus," Kyle reminded her, scanning the area with his rifle in hand. "We don't know what's friendly or hostile yet." Saren approached the nearest structure, running her fingers over its weathered surface. "This was a habitat," she murmured. "Human design, but altered. It's almost as if the environment itself adapted to incorporate it." Eric's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, I'm getting faint power readings nearby. Could be old tech still running." "Mark the location," Kale ordered. "We'll investigate once we secure the area." As the team moved deeper into the ruins, the weight of Nova Eterna's mystery pressed down on them. The settlement whispered of survival and desperation, its silence heavy with untold stories. And as they approached the source of the power reading, the faint hum of machinery broke the stillness, hinting at secrets waiting to be unearthed, secrets that would challenge their understanding of humanity's past and their own place in the cosmos. The ruins of Nova Eterna whispered their secrets through the wind. The faint hum of alien machinery that the crew had detected earlier grew louder as they approached the crumbling heart of the abandoned settlement. It was an uneasy sound, rhythmic and almost organic, as though the machines themselves were alive. Around the crew, the glowing vegetation pulsed faintly, casting an eerie bioluminescent glow on the cracked paths beneath their boots. Captain Darius Kale kept his rifle steady, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. The alien ruins felt both abandoned and alive, an unsettling paradox that gnawed at the back of his mind. Every step they took felt like an intrusion, as if the land itself were watching them. Lyra, Kale said quietly, his voice breaking the oppressive silence. "Tell me you're getting something useful from all this." Dr. Lyra Ventaris was crouched over a peculiar patch of moss that coiled and uncoiled like a living thing. She had her portable scanner out, its interface flickering as it tried to process the biological data. Lyra's curiosity was unshaken by the unsettling atmosphere, her fascination shining through as she whispered, This is incredible. The flora here isn't just bioluminescent, it's reactive. It's almost as if it's part of a larger system." "A larger system," Kale echoed, his brow furrowing. She nodded, her dark hair catching the pale light as she glanced up at him. "Think of it like a network. The plants, the structures, maybe even the ruins themselves, they're connected. I don't think we're just dealing with an ecosystem here. This feels designed." Kale's lips pressed into a thin line as he processed her words. "Keep scanning," he said finally. "We need answers, not more questions." Behind them, Dr. Saren Talir was exploring one of the dilapidated buildings. The historian moved with a practiced carefulness, her gloved hands brushing against the walls as she studied the markings etched into the stone-like material. She carried a small tablet in her other hand, recording the faded symbols and fragmented text. The markings appeared human at first glance, but closer inspection revealed alien patterns interwoven with them, fluid, spiraling designs that defied any earthly language. "These aren't just human structures," Saren murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "There's evidence of collaboration here. Whoever lived in this settlement didn't just adapt to this world, they worked with someone, or something." Eric Vale's voice crackled through their comms. "Captain, I've got power readings increasing up ahead. It's coming from a central building. It looks like an old colony core. But I'm telling you, this tech is beyond anything we've ever built." Kale motioned for the team to regroup. Together they made their way toward the structure Eric had identified. The building stood taller than the rest, its facade weathered but intact. Bioluminescent vines coiled up its walls, their faint glow illuminating alien carvings that shimmered faintly, as though reacting to the crew's approach. Eric was already at the entrance, crouched over a control panel that flickered faintly with life. His engineering kit lay open beside him, tools scattered as he worked to interface with the ancient technology. He looked up as the others approached, a rare gleam of excitement in his eyes. "Check this out," he said, gesturing at the panel. "This thing's running on some kind of hybrid power source. Part of it's human early colony tech, maybe, but the rest is Athari. I've seen designs like this in old databases about their biotech, but this is next level." Kale's expression remained guarded as he peered over Eric's shoulder. "Can you get it running?" Eric grunted, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. "I can try, but no promises. This stuff's delicate, and if I screw it up, we could lose whatever's still in here." "Do it," Kale said. "Saren, Lyra, keep looking for anything that might help us understand what we're dealing with." As Eric worked, Saren wandered further into the structure, drawn by faint markings that glowed faintly on the walls. Her historian's intuition guided her to a small chamber where a cylindrical device stood at the center, surrounded by more alien carvings. The device pulsed with a faint light, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift as she moved closer. "Kale," she called over her comms, her voice steady despite the wonder in her tone. "I found something. It looks like a data archive." Kale was at her side moments later, his sharp eyes narrowing at the strange device. "What makes you think it's an archive?" Saren gestured at the carvings. "These symbols, they're consistent with Athari inscriptions I've studied, and the design of this device. It matches descriptions from fragmentary records recovered decades ago. If we can access it, we might be able to piece together what happened to the colony." Kale nodded. "Eric, get in here. We've got something that needs your touch." As Eric joined them, he examined the device with a mixture of curiosity and frustration. "This thing's Athari all right," he muttered, running a diagnostic scanner over it. "And it's ancient. I'll see if I can interface with it, but don't hold your breath." While Eric worked, Lyra wandered deeper into the ruins, her scanner in hand. She felt an unshakable pull toward a cluster of glowing plants that seemed to form a circular pattern on the ground. As she approached, the glow intensified, and the plants began to emit a low hum that resonated through the air. She crouched down, her scanner beeping rapidly as it picked up strange signals. "Captain," she said over the comms, her voice tinged with awe. "I think I've found something alive. It's not just the plants, there's a presence here, something beneath the surface." Kale's voice came through, firm but laced with unease. "Lyra, don't go any further until we regroup." Before Lyra could respond, Eric let out a triumphant sound from the archive chamber. The device before him flickered to life, projecting a holographic display of data that filled the room with a faint blue light. Saren stepped closer, her eyes wide as she began to parse the information. "It's a record," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Logs from the colony's leadership. They detail the early years' resource shortages, diseases they couldn't cure, and contact with the Athari." The room fell silent as Saren scrolled through the data, her expression growing darker with each entry. "They were desperate," she said finally. "The Athari offered a solution, some kind of fusion process to adapt them to the planet's environment. But the early experiments, they failed, horribly." Kale's jaw tightened. "How many?" Saren swallowed hard. "Dozens, maybe more. There are references to volunteers, people who didn't survive the process." Kale turned to Eric, who had gone pale at the revelation. "Keep digging," the captain said grimly. "We need to know everything." As the holographic logs continued to unfold, a new layer of Nova Eterna's history began to emerge. It was a story of survival at any cost, a story that raised more questions than it answered. And as Lyra's voice crackled over the comms again, her tone urgent and tinged with fear, the crew realized their discoveries were only the beginning. "Captain," she said, her words cutting through the silence, "I think we're being watched." The air around the settlement grew heavier as the crew continued their exploration, thick with an intangible tension that gnawed at their nerves. The ruins of Nova Eterna seemed to pulse faintly, the alien vines coiling and shifting as if responding to their movements. Overhead, the twin moons bathed the landscape in cold light, casting long shadows that danced with an unnatural rhythm. Captain Darius Kale tightened his grip on his rifle as he approached Dr. Lyra Ventaris, who stood frozen near the glowing circle of plants she had discovered earlier. Her scanner emitted a steady stream of rapid beeps, and her wide eyes were fixed on something just beyond the reach of the shuttle's landing lights. "What do you see?" Kale asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra pointed, her hand trembling slightly. "There," she said, "in the shadows. Movement. I thought it was the plants at first, but it's not." Kale followed her gaze, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. At first he saw nothing but the swaying vegetation and the ruins shrouded in mist. Then, just at the edge of the light, a figure emerged. It was humanoid, but unlike anything he had seen before. Its form was lean and elegant, its skin faintly luminous and marked with intricate, bioluminescent patterns that mirrored the vines covering the ruins. It stood silently, its head tilted slightly as if studying them. Kale raised a hand, signaling the rest of the crew to hold their positions. "We're not alone," he said into his comms. "Stay alert." The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. As it approached, more figures began to emerge from the shadows, each bearing the same hybrid features. They stood in a loose circle around the crew, their glowing eyes unblinking as they watched. Kale counted at least a dozen of them, though there could have been more hiding in the darkness. Lyra took a hesitant step forward, her hands raised in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "We're not here to harm you," she said, her voice calm despite the pounding of her heart. "We're explorers from Earth. We've come to understand what happened to this colony." One of the hybrids stepped forward, taller than the others and adorned with patterns more intricate than the rest. Its voice, when it spoke, was resonant and melodic, like a chorus of tones layered together. "Earth," it said, the word heavy with an emotion Kale couldn't quite identify. "You are from the origin." Kale stepped forward, lowering his weapon slightly but keeping it at the ready. You are the descendants of the colony." The hybrid nodded slowly. "We are the Centauri, the children of humanity and Ethari. You tread on sacred ground." Kale exchanged a glance with Lyra, who seemed on the verge of bursting with questions. "We didn't mean to intrude," Kale said carefully, "but your colony disappeared over 2 centuries ago. We came to find out why and to see if we could help." The hybrid tilted its head again, as if weighing his words. "The colony survived," it said, "but not as it was. The fusion saved us, but it changed us. We are no longer as you are, nor do we wish to be." Lyra stepped closer, her curiosity overcoming her caution. "The fusion? You mean the process the Ethari used to combine human and alien traits? How did it work? What did it do to your people?" The hybrid's glowing eyes shifted to her, and for a moment, the light patterns on its skin pulsed in time with its breathing. "The Ethari gave us life when the world sought to take it. The process merged our forms, our minds, our essence. We became one with the Ethari, and in doing so, we became something new." Kale frowned. "And the Ethari? Where are they now?" The hybrid's expression darkened, and a ripple of unease passed through the gathered Centauri. "Gone," it said, the word heavy with sorrow. "They gave us their gift, but they could not stay. Their time here ended long ago." Before Kale could press further, another voice interrupted, sharp and filled with anger. "And now you come to take what they left behind." Kale turned to see a younger hybrid stepping forward, its movements quick and aggressive. Its patterns glowed brighter than the others, a sign of heightened emotion. "You come from Earth, the place that abandoned us. You have no right to be here." "We didn't abandon you," Kale said, his voice firm. "The colony was lost. We've spent years trying to find it." "Lost," the hybrid spat. "No, forgotten, discarded. And now you return, not to help, but to claim what is ours." The tension in the air thickened, and Kale could feel his team bracing for a potential confrontation. Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm and soothing. "We don't want to take anything from you," she said. "We only want to understand. Your survival is a miracle, a testament to both humanity and the Athari. We want to learn from you." The younger hybrid glared at her but didn't respond. Instead, the taller one raised a hand, signaling for silence. "There is truth in her words," it said. "But there is also danger in your presence. You awaken memories that should remain buried." Saren, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward, her voice measured. "If we've stirred something painful, we're sorry. But your history is part of ours, and understanding it could help us both. Perhaps we could share knowledge, exchange what we've learned." The hybrid leader regarded her for a long moment before nodding. "We will allow this. Exchange, but tread carefully, Earthborn. There are truths that are better left in the shadows." Kale exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Thank you," he said. "We'll respect your wishes." The hybrids began to retreat into the darkness, their glowing forms fading like specters. Only the leader remained, its luminous eyes fixed on Kale. "Your arrival will bring change," it said. "Some will welcome it, others will not. Be prepared, Earthborn." With that, it too disappeared into the shadows, leaving the crew alone once more. Kale turned to his team, his expression grim. "This just got a lot more complicated." "Complicated," Eric muttered, glancing uneasily at the ruins around them. "Try impossible. How are we supposed to get answers if half of them think we're here to steal their secrets?" Lyra shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "We've made contact. That's a start. And the hybrids, the Centauri, they're extraordinary. Imagine what we could learn from them." Kale didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the glowing plants beneath their feet. The words of the hybrid leader echoed in his mind, a warning that felt as much like a promise. Change was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. The settlement's haunting silence was broken only by the rhythmic hum of alien machinery and the occasional rustle of bioluminescent vines. The Centauri had withdrawn to the periphery of the ruins, leaving the crew of the SS Lumina alone to process the weight of their discoveries. The air felt heavier now, charged with the tension of truths both revealed and concealed. Captain Darius Kale stood at the edge of the settlement, staring into the alien night as his team gathered near the colony core. "This is bigger than we imagined," Dr. Lyra Ventaris said, her voice laced with wonder as she studied the swirling holographic projections Saren Talir had unearthed earlier. "Not just survival. The fusion, the blending of two species, it's unlike anything humanity has ever encountered. This is evolution on an entirely new scale." "Evolution," with a body count, Eric Vale interjected, his tone sharp. He leaned against the cracked wall of the core building, his arms crossed tightly. "You saw those records. The Athari didn't just save them, they experimented on them. People died in those fusions. This wasn't some miracle, it was a gamble." Saren's fingers hovered over the controls of the archive, her face pale but resolute. "It's true," she said softly. "The early stages of the process were catastrophic. The Athari provided the means, but the colonists made the choice. They believed it was the only way to survive on this planet. They sacrificed their humanity to ensure their future." Kale turned, his gaze sweeping over his team. "And it worked," he said bluntly. "The Centauri survived. They've built a society here, one that thrives in conditions no human could endure. We can argue about the morality of it, but that doesn't change the reality." "Reality?" Eric's voice rose, frustration evident. "The reality is, this fusion process could have been a death sentence for the colony. And now, they're telling us to stay in our lane, not to ask too many questions. I don't trust them, Captain. They might look part human, but they're not us anymore." "They're still part of our story," Lyra said, her voice firm. "And this isn't just about us. The Centauri are a bridge between two species, a testament to what's possible when survival demands cooperation. We can learn from them if we approach this the right way." Kale raised a hand, cutting off the brewing argument. "Enough," he said, his tone brooking no dissent. "We're here to gather information, not to pass judgment. Our priority is understanding this colony, its history, its technology, and its people. But we also need to focus on the present. Saren, what else have you found?" Saren tapped a series of commands into the archive's interface, bringing up a new projection. This one showed a schematic of the colony's original layout, overlaid with more recent modifications. This confirms what we've suspected, she said. The Athari not only provided the fusion process, but also helped design the settlement's infrastructure. These buildings aren't just shelters, they're part of a biomechanical network. A network, for what Kale asked. To sustain life, Saren replied. The settlement is integrated with the environment. The vines, the glowing plants, they're all connected to the core systems. It's symbiotic. The colony didn't just adapt to Nova Eterna, it became part of it. Lyra's eyes lit up. That explains the biosignatures I've been picking up. The entire settlement is alive, in a way. It's like the planet and the colony are working together to sustain each other. Fascinating, Eric muttered sarcastically. But does that help us with the other problem? Kale's gaze sharpened. What other problem? Eric hesitated, then gestured toward the horizon. The Zarkons. I've been running scans since we landed. We've got incoming. A fleet of ships is gathering in orbit around their homeworld, and it doesn't look friendly. The room fell silent, the weight of Eric's words settling over them like a storm cloud. Lyra's expression shifted from awe to concern. The Centauri mentioned a threat, she said. They called the Zarkons a hostile species. If they're mobilizing, this could turn into a war. Kale straightened, his mind already shifting to strategy. We need to warn the Centauri, he said. If the Zarkons attack, this colony won't survive without defenses. And what about us? Eric asked. Are we supposed to stick around and play hero? We don't have the firepower to take on an entire fleet. Kale's jaw tightened. We're not abandoning them. Not yet. If there's a way to strengthen their defenses, we're going to find it. Saren cleared her throat, her voice hesitant. There's something else, she said. The archive mentions a weapon, something the Athari left behind. It's vague, but it seems to be tied to the biomechanical network. If we could find it. Hold on, Eric interrupted. You're saying there's an alien superweapon buried somewhere in this mess, and you think we can just waltz in and fire it up? We don't know what it is yet, Saren admitted. But if the Zarkons are coming, we might not have a choice. Kale nodded, his mind racing. Saren, keep digging through the archive. Eric, see if you can pinpoint the Zarkon fleet's movements. Lyra, I need you to work with the Centauri. Convince them to let us help, whether it's with their technology or this weapon. Lyra hesitated. They're already suspicious of us, Captain. If we push too hard. Then don't push, Kale said. Convince them this is in their best interest, and do it quickly. The crew dispersed, each member burdened with the weight of their task. Kale remained behind, staring at the glowing vines that seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. The Centauri's warning echoed in his mind, your arrival will bring change. He prepared. Hours later, Lyra returned with news. The Centauri elders agreed to meet with us, she said. But they're divided. Some believe we're here to help, others think we're a threat. We'll handle it, Kale said. What about the weapon? Saren appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. I found its location, she said. It's buried beneath the settlement, connected to the colony's core. But there's something strange, it's dormant, like it's waiting for a trigger. Kale's eyes narrowed. Then we'd better figure out how to wake it up. If the Zarkons are coming, we'll need every advantage we can get. As the crew prepared for the meeting with the Centauri and the search for the weapon, the tension in the air grew thicker. The price of survival loomed over them, a shadow cast by the choices of the past and the threats of the future. In the ruins of Nova Eterna, the line between humanity and survival blurred further with every step they took. The chamber where the Centauri elders had gathered was unlike any other place the crew had encountered on Nova Eterna. The walls were a seamless blend of natural stone and bioluminescent vines, forming intricate patterns that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow. At the center of the room stood a large, circular platform, its surface etched with swirling designs that shimmered faintly as if responding to the presence of those within. Captain Darius Kale stood at the edge of the platform, flanked by Dr. Lyra Ventaris and Dr. Saren Talir. Behind them, Arik Vale leaned against a column, his arms crossed, his expression a mix of skepticism and impatience. The Centauri elders sat in a half-circle on raised seats, their glowing forms casting shifting shadows across the chamber. Their leader, the tall hybrid, who had first spoken to the crew, stood at the center, his luminous eyes fixed on Kale. "You claim to bring warnings," the leader said, his voice resonating like a distant melody. "You speak of a threat from the Zarkons, yet your arrival itself has sown discord among us." Kale stepped forward, his expression calm but resolute. "We didn't come here to disrupt your lives," he said, "but the Zarkons are mobilizing. If they attack, this settlement won't survive without preparation." A younger elder, her glowing pattern sharper and more angular than the others, stood abruptly. "Why should we trust you?" she demanded. "You are Earthborn, remnants of those who abandoned us. How do we know you do not bring this danger with you?" Kale met her gaze evenly. "We didn't abandon you. The colony was lost. We've spent centuries searching for answers. But right now it doesn't matter what you believe about us. What matters is survival. If we work together, we have a chance to stop the Zarkons." The chamber buzzed with the faint hum of the Centauri's collective unease. Their leader raised a hand, and silence fell. "Captain Kale speaks truth," he said. "The Zarkons have long seen us as an affront to nature. They fear what we represent, and now they see an opportunity to destroy us." "Then why do we not use the weapon?" another elder asked, their voice tinged with urgency. "The Athari left it for us. It was meant to protect us." The leader's luminous eyes dimmed slightly, and his voice grew heavy. "The weapon is not simply a tool. It is tied to the core of our being. To awaken it is to risk everything we have built." Lyra stepped forward, her voice gentle but insistent. "Elder, I've seen what your people have accomplished here. Your society is a testament to resilience and unity. But if the Zarkons attack, they won't just destroy your settlement, they'll erase everything the Athari and your ancestors fought for. Please, let us help you." The leader was silent for a long moment, his glowing patterns shifting slowly. Finally he nodded. "Very well. You may assist us, but understand this: the weapon is our last resort. If it is awakened, there will be no turning back." With the elders' permission, the crew began their preparations. Saren and Arik worked tirelessly to decipher the ancient schematics from the archive, piecing together the mechanism that controlled the weapon. The device, buried deep beneath the settlement, was tied to the biomechanical network that sustained the colony. Activating it would draw immense energy from the core, potentially disrupting the delicate balance that kept the settlement alive. "It's a failsafe," Arik said, his voice tight with frustration as he examined the schematics. "The Athari designed this thing to wipe out anything within a massive radius. If we use it, it's not just the Zarkons who'll suffer. The Centauri could lose everything." Kale nodded grimly. "Then we need to make sure we exhaust every other option first. How are the defenses coming?" Lyra entered the room, her expression weary but determined. "I've been working with the Centauri engineers. Their technology is incredible, but it's not designed for war. We've managed to create some basic shields and automated defenses, but it won't be enough against a full-scale attack." Kale ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "Then we hold the line as long as we can. If the Zarkons break through, we'll activate the weapon as a last resort. It's not ideal, but it's the best chance we have." As the crew and the Centauri worked together, tensions began to rise within the settlement. The divide between those who supported collaboration with the Earthborn and those who opposed it grew sharper, threatening to fracture the fragile unity that held the colony together. One night, as the crew gathered to review their plans, a Centauri burst into their quarters, their glowing patterns flickering erratically. "Captain Kale," they said, their voice urgent. "The isolationists are planning to sabotage the weapon. They believe it should never be awakened, even at the cost of our survival." Kale's jaw tightened. "Where are they?" The Centauri gestured toward the eastern sector of the settlement. "They've gathered near the core. If they succeed, the weapon will be lost." Kale turned to his team, his voice sharp. "Arik, Lyra, with me. Saren, stay here and keep working on the activation sequence. We can't afford any delays." The eastern sector was a maze of glowing vines and crumbling structures. The air was thick with tension as Kale and his team approached the core. A group of Centauri stood in a loose circle, their voices raised in argument. At the center, a younger Centauri was attempting to sever the vines that connected the core to the biomechanical network. "Stop," Kale shouted, raising his weapon. The isolationists turned to face him, their glowing patterns flaring with anger. "This is not your fight," Earthborn one of them said, their voice cold. "The weapon is an abomination. It should never be used." "If you destroy it," Kale said, his voice firm, "you're condemning your people to death. The Zarkons won't stop until this settlement is gone. You know that." The isolationists hesitated, their glowing patterns dimming slightly. Kale stepped forward, lowering his weapon but keeping his stance strong. "This isn't about Earth or the Athari, or even the past. It's about survival. If we work together, we can protect what your ancestors built. But we need the weapon to do it." For a moment, the tension hung thick in the air. Then, slowly, the isolationists stepped back. The younger Centauri dropped their tool, their expression conflicted but resigned. "You have our help," the leader of the isolationists said quietly. "But if the weapon destroys us, that blood will be on your hands." Kale nodded. "We'll make sure it doesn't come to that." As the crew returned to their preparations, the Zarkons arrived in orbit. Their fleet, a mass of angular, shadowy ships, descended like a storm over the settlement. The first wave of the attack was swift and brutal, their weapons tearing through the hastily constructed defenses. The Centauri and the Earthborn fought side by side, their combined efforts holding the enemy at bay, but just barely. In the chaos, Saren managed to complete the activation sequence for the weapon. As the Zarkons breached the outer defenses, Kale gave the order. "Do it," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of the decision. The ground beneath the settlement trembled as the weapon awakened. A brilliant pulse of energy surged through the biomechanical network, spreading outward in a wave of blinding light. The Zarkon ships faltered, their weapons silenced as the energy engulfed them. One by one, they fell from the sky, consumed by the weapon's devastating power. When the light faded, the settlement was eerily silent. The Centauri stood amidst the ruins, their glowing patterns dimmed but intact. The weapon had spared them, but its toll was evident. The biomechanical network was weakened, its glow faint and erratic. Kale stood at the edge of the platform, his team gathered around him. They had won, but the cost was undeniable. The Centauri had survived, but their future was uncertain, and as Kale looked out over the ruins of Nova Eterna, he knew their journey was far from over. The battlefield was quiet now, the wreckage of Zarkon ships strewn across the horizon like jagged, alien skeletons. Smoke curled into the cold air, mingling with the faint bioluminescent glow of the settlement's surviving structures. The towering central spire of the Centauri colony still pulsed faintly, though its light was dim, as if exhausted from the weapon's activation. The ground beneath it was cracked, the biomechanical network that sustained the settlement visibly strained. Captain Darius Kale stood amidst the ruins, his boots crunching over scorched earth and shattered fragments of alien technology. Around him, his crew worked tirelessly, coordinating with the Centauri to assess the damage. Survivors moved through the settlement, their glowing forms dimmed but alive. Despite the devastation, there was a flicker of something unyielding in their movement's hope. Kale scanned the horizon, his sharp eyes taking in the aftermath. The Zarkon fleet was gone, their once imposing presence obliterated by the weapon's overwhelming force. Yet the victory felt hollow. The weapon had worked, but at a cost that had yet to be fully realized. Dr. Lyra Ventaris approached him, her face streaked with dirt and her usual exuberance tempered by exhaustion. "The settlement's holding together, but just barely," she reported. "The biomechanical network took a huge hit when the weapon activated. It's still functional, but it's going to take time to recover. The Centauri engineers are working on stabilizing it." Kale nodded, his expression grim. "And the people?" "They're alive," Lyra said, her voice softening. "Shaken but alive. Some of them are still angry, though. They blame us for pushing the weapon's activation. They think we've weakened their connection to the planet." Kale sighed, running a hand through his hair. They're not wrong, he admitted. But without the weapon, there wouldn't be a settlement left to save. Lyra hesitated, then placed a hand on his arm. They'll see that, eventually. Give them time. As Lyra moved off to assist with the recovery efforts, Kale turned to find Dr. Saren Talir standing near one of the colony's damaged buildings. She was staring at a fragment of the archive interface, her fingers hovering over its flickering projections. Find anything? Kale asked as he approached. Saren glanced up, her face pale but determined. I've been going through the records again, she said. There's a section 1 missed before, hidden in the deeper layers of the archive. It's a message from the original colonists. Kale raised an eyebrow. A message. She nodded, her voice tinged with awe. It was recorded after the fusion process succeeded, but before the Athari left. It's haunting, really. They knew what they were becoming, but they believed it was the only way to survive. They left the message as a warning and as a plea. They wanted future generations, including Earth, to understand why they made the choices they did. Kale leaned in, his gaze fixed on the flickering projection. Play it. Saren activated the message, and a ghostly figure appeared, a woman with tired eyes and a voice that carried the weight of sacrifice. We were not prepared for this world, the recording began. Its beauty hid its cruelty. Our bodies were too fragile, our minds too rigid. The Athari gave us a choice: adapt or perish. We chose to adapt. In doing so, we became something new, something neither entirely human nor entirely alien. We leave this message not for ourselves, but for those who come after us. Remember us not as those who abandoned their humanity, but as those who redefined it. If you find this place, do not judge us, understand us, and carry our story forward. The recording ended, the figure dissolving into light. Kale stood in silence, the weight of the colonist's words settling over him like a shroud. They hadn't just survived, they had transcended. Yet the cost of that transcendence was a question that would haunt him for the rest of his days. They knew, Saren said softly, breaking the silence. They knew what they were giving up, and they still did it. Kale nodded, his voice low. Because they believed it was the only way. As the day wore on, the crew continued to work alongside the Centauri, repairing what they could and documenting what they couldn't. The isolationists, though subdued after the battle, remained wary of the Earthborn, their trust hard-earned but fragile. The elders convened once more, inviting Kale and his team to join them. The central chamber felt heavier now, its glowing patterns dimmer than before. The elder leader stood at the center, his expression solemn. You have saved us, he said, his voice resonating through the chamber. The Zarkons are defeated. The weapon has served its purpose. Yet our future is uncertain. Kale nodded. The network is damaged, but it can be repaired. You'll rebuild. You've survived worse. The elder's glowing eyes flickered. Perhaps. But your presence here has awakened more than just the weapon. It has stirred questions among our people, questions about our origins, our connection to Earth, and our place in the universe. Lyra stepped forward, her voice calm but passionate. Those questions are important. Your story is a part of humanity's story. If we work together, we can preserve it. We don't have to be divided. Another elder, the younger one who had voiced distrust before, spoke up. And what of Earth? Will you return there with what you have learned? Will you take our technology and use it for your own gain? Kale met her gaze evenly. We came here to find answers, not to exploit you. What we take back will be what you allow us to share, nothing more. The elder leader considered this, his glowing patterns shifting slowly. Then we must decide. But first we must heal. The Earthborn may stay until the network is stabilized. After that, you will leave. Kale inclined his head. Fair enough. In the days that followed, the crew worked tirelessly to assist the Centauri in stabilizing their biomechanical systems. Lyra formed bonds with the Centauri engineers, learning their ways and sharing knowledge in return. Saren delved deeper into the archive, piecing together the fragments of Nova Eterna's history. Even Eric, despite his initial reservations, found himself grudgingly admiring the ingenuity of the hybrid technology. When the day came for the crew to leave, the Centauri gathered at the edge of the settlement to bid them farewell. The elder leader stepped forward, a small, glowing sphere in his hands. "This is a fragment of our archive," he said, placing it in Kale's hands. "It contains the history of Nova Eterna as we remember it. Share it with your people. Let them know who we are." Kale accepted the sphere with a solemn nod. "Thank you. We won't forget." As the crew boarded their shuttle, Lyra turned for one last look at the settlement. The Centauri stood together, their glowing forms a symbol of resilience and unity against the backdrop of the alien landscape. When the SS Lumina lifted off, carrying the crew away from Nova Eterna, Kyle stood on the bridge, the archive sphere in his hand. He turned it over slowly, the faint glow of its patterns reflecting in his eyes. Captain Saren said quietly, stepping up beside him, "Do you think Earth is ready for this?" Kale stared out at the stars, his jaw set. "Maybe not, but it's time they tried." As the ship vanished into the void, Nova Eterna faded from view, a distant world, forged in sacrifice and survival, its story carried forward by those who dared to uncover its truth. A new legacy had been born, one that would shape humanity's future in ways no one could yet imagine.